My dorm made a rule against pumpkins. Didn't say anything about pineapples. Landlord advertises all of our company's equipment for sale to our competitors. Best follow our eviction to the letter. TLDR, spoilers. Landlord gives us 7 days to vacate our leisure business from the building. He thinks we can't empty the business during lockdown and proceeds to advertise our equipment for sale to our competition. We sell everything in 7 days and destroy the rest. Enjoy no rent and the loss of your potential buyers. I work for a leisure company. Think soft play, indoor soccer, laser tag, can't be specific. Prior to lockdown, managers and the big bosses were negotiating the renewal of the lease on one of our parks. Things were going mostly smoothly, however the landlords were difficult to contact. Then 2020's hit the fan. All of our sites were closed and everything was thrown into a mess. Negotiations began to slip down the priority list. Nobody thought the landlord would push an eviction for an expired lease during this period, especially with it still getting rent, despite the site's closure and the closure of every business and restaurant in the immediate area. We were wrong. A few days ago, we received a letter saying we had 7 days to leave the premises and take everything with us. We are reminded that anything left in the building after 7 days will become the landlord's property. That line is very important. Now, a lot of construction goes into installing our equipment into a new building, which makes emptying one even harder. Add a lockdown with no staff and most businesses shut, it meant that saving much of our assets would prove to be extremely difficult. To lose a profitable site and all of its assets is definitely a blow to our company. But here's where it gets worse. A few days into our 7-day eviction, we find out that the landlord has been advertising our park to our competitors. But he isn't offering just the building. He is offering all of our stuff pre-installed, ready to go, just needs rebranding. The landlord has evicted us from the property in an attempt to increase rent and make a solid profit from our equipment installed because he thinks we won't be able to empty the park. We were furious. And here is where the malicious compliance came in. We were told we had 7 days to move everything we owned out of the property, so that's what we did. Local businesses from all around offered up free space to store our things. A few people came back out of lockdown and they all spent the rest of the week removing, selling, or destroying everything that was related to us. We didn't even leave light fittings. In every other site vacation we have seen, we always end up leaving thousands of dollars worth of disco lights in the ceilings because they're too hard to get. We leave most of the construction in, as well as things like the bars and kitchens that all stay intact, recognizable as what they once were, but not this building. We ripped up the flooring we installed, tore down the walls that were not part of the original structure, wooden walls to divide up the space, ripped apart our manager's offices, and removed all artwork and lockers. The landlord now has every new deal he has been making dead in the water, a large renovation bill to install new flooring, etc. Or a company willing to do it themselves like we were. Lockdown has been extended another 4 weeks, so he has at least another 4 weeks without rent, we were paying, and won't have any potential buyers. Silver lining, the assets we got out of the site, fridges, TVs, equipment, food, tables, have all been sold, and the lack of rent and additional income has helped the business and paid staff wages. Get rid of my vacation? Have fun replacing me. I originally posted this as a comment on another thread, but realized it needed its own limelight. I worked at a company that gave out exorbitant amounts of vacation. Anyone who worked there for 25 plus years received 8 weeks of vacation and 2 weeks of personal time. This was a family-owned company, but rather large. We ran 3 shifts totaling 250 plus people. Enter Jimmy. Jimmy was a grizzled old man. He started at the company when he was just 20. Now he was 63 and gave absolutely zero shit. Jimmy also knew how to make a specific part for our product, him and one other higher up in the office. One day, the plant owner comes out and announces he's selling to a corporation. He's older and ready to retire. He promises that there will be very little change and wishes us all well. The new company comes in and immediately goes after many of the great benefits we had. The first thing they do is cut everyone's max vacation down to 4 weeks and do completely away with personal time. Anyone who's maxed out had until December 31st of that year to use it up, and they wouldn't pay it out. They then go into the office and clean house, firing anyone who's close to retirement, including Jimmy's backup. But they also do away with one very important rule. You no longer have to get vacation approved. You can just call in and take it. Jimmy is pissed, and they know it. They realize he's the only one in the building that can do his job now. So they hire a new kid for him to train, most likely to permanently replace Jimmy. So Jimmy does what anyone would do. He calls in the first training day for the new hire and lets us know he's going to use all of his PTO at once, and promptly takes 10 weeks off. We had a backstock of parts he had made, so it wasn't too unnerving. But for 10 weeks, Jimmy went and applied to other jobs, found one, and started. Fast forward 10 weeks, it's the day Jimmy is supposed to return. He doesn't. For 2 days, they try calling him and even go to his house. He's nowhere to be found. Finally, on day 3, he calls and resigns, and they lose their shit. The parts he makes are specialized and patented by the original founder. You can't just hire someone off the street to make them. What eventually happened was they had to contract the original owner to come in and teach some new hires how to make them. And when he found out what all they had done, it pissed him off. The last I heard, he charged them a 7-figure contract to teach them how to produce the parts, and they had to pony up or close down. Moral of the story, don't f with people's vacation time. Manager forces me to get a doctor's note despite it being illegal to do so. Doctor writes him the most passive-aggressive note signing me off for 2 weeks instead of 2 days to teach him a lesson. I posted this, but it got removed, and I think it was maybe because I didn't make the malicious compliance clear enough. So I'm going to try again and make it extra clear. When I was in my early 20s, I worked at a supermarket. I should note that I was a pretty reliable employee. I was never late. In fact, I often got in early, and I rarely called in sick. At the time this happened, I had not called in sick for 9 months, and even then, the manager had sent me home. I had been up all night, swinging between burning hot and freezing cold, so I was obviously feverish, and I had been throwing up at both ends, shall we say. At one point at about 2 a.m., I was on the toilet with my head in the sink, utterly miserable. I must have passed out because the next morning I knew I was lifting my head off the sink and it was 7 a.m. I was due to start work at 12 that day, but that obviously wasn't going to happen, so I called up the manager. Let's call the manager Steve. Steve was known for being a real a-hole. He never believed anyone who called in sick except his best buds, usually other managers, never lowly staff, but often called in sick himself. A lot of the time we knew it was because he was hungover and not actually sick. The conversation went as follows. Me: "Hey Steve, sorry, I can't come in, I'm sick." Steve: "With what?" Me: "I don't know, I think it might be the flu. I've been up all night being sick and I have a fever." Steve: "Don't be stupid. If you had the flu, you'd be completely knocked out. I need you in. Come in or you're fired." Me: "I can't. I just told you I can't stop vomiting. I passed out." Steve: "Either come in or bring a doctor's note or you're fired." In the UK, you are legally allowed to self-certify for 5 days. This means you can tell your employer you are sick and you do not need a doctor's note. If you're sick for more than 5 days, you then need a note. It is also illegal to demand a doctor's note during the self-certify period. I knew this, but I was terrified. This was during the recession. I couldn't afford to lose my job, so I got myself dressed, almost passed out trying to do so, then trudged to the doctor's some 25 minutes away. I end up sitting in the doctor's office for a little over an hour, which for walk-in was pretty good. I get in to see the doctor, and she is furious at me for coming in. "You're not supposed to come to the doctor's when you have a cold or flu." And of course I knew I should be able to self-certify. She told me as such, saying I shouldn't be here and should have stayed at home. I then explained what had happened with Steve and how he had threatened to fire me over this, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. I was struggling as it was. My doctor turned her anger towards my manager. She asked if I got sick pay from the company, and I said yes. "Oh, he wants a sick note, does he?" the doctor says. "Okay, I'll give him a sick note." Now, my manager just wanted a note confirming I was sick, but instead my doctor wrote something along the lines of this: "My name has come to the surgery because manager's name has insisted she come in spite of the fact that this is illegal and all employees are allowed to self-certify. Due to being forced to make this unnecessary and highly dangerous trip when the patient is ill, has a fever of 39 degrees Celsius, and almost passed out in the waiting room, I am signing my name off for 2 full weeks to recover." Had my name been allowed to self-certify as is the law, they might only have needed a few days, but due to straining themselves, they now require 2 full weeks. They are not to be permitted to work until date 2 weeks later. The doctor said she would have signed me off longer, but this was the longest she could do without requiring further evidence. So basically, instead of just being off for a few days, I was now signed off for a full 2 weeks, and I'd be paid for it. I went to my place of work, at which point one of the duty managers saw me and asked me what the heck I was doing here. "Go home." I was obviously very unwell. I explained what happened. They agreed to help me downstairs to Steve's office and went with me inside. I handed Steve the note. He looked worried and tried to say, "I wasn't being serious about firing you." Well, gee, when you angrily growled it down the phone, it sure sounded like it. The duty manager then declared that they were going to drive me home. It was clear Steve wanted to argue but had the sense to know he shouldn't. The duty manager then drove me home, made sure I was okay, then went back to work where they informed our union rep of what had happened. Steve had a disciplinary hearing where he was given a severe reprimand and a warning. Steve tried to argue he never said I'd be fired and I was lying and just decided to go to the doctors, but the duty manager said they heard him admit to it when he said to me that he really didn't mean it. I felt better after a few days and enjoyed my 2 weeks off, fully paid, and enjoyed the nice weather we had. Meanwhile, Steve was forced to work overtime because we were short-staffed. So, thanks to the doctor, instead of being off for a few days, I ended up getting a nice 2-week paid vacation. And Steve was given a final warning, all because he insisted I get a doctor's note. TLDR, manager demands I get a doctor's note or I'm fired, so the doctor signs me off sick for 2 weeks instead of 2 days to teach him a lesson. My boss loves to call me at 6:15 a.m. to ask me if I would like to fill the shifts of the people who just called in sick. This is an everyday thing. I was bored and frustrated, so I decided to volunteer at 3:30 a.m. to call this same manager to ask if they needed extra help. He got super pissed and tried to write me up for it. I showed the GM the timestamps of the calls I had received. I don't get calls anymore. You can't continue working from home because you go idle and chat too often. As part of the plan to return to office post-COVID, my company has done a lot of redesignating of who can permanently work from home, who can hybrid, etc. I really wanted to work from home full-time. I hate the office with a burning passion. It's distracting, it's a long commute, there's no benefit to being there, so on and so forth. I'd just rather be at home. Well, when we thought May was going to be go back to office time, they started giving out the new designations. I got designated as in-office full-time. It made no sense to me. I work on a team of 8 people and each of us is in a different office somewhere in the country. I've literally never been to an in-person meeting or needed to do in-person work in 3 years at this company. Every single other person on my team got designated to work from home, so I brought it up with my boss and asked to work from home. When I started at this company and lived elsewhere, I got to work from home for 4 months before I moved, and the past 14 months during COVID have been at home. So 18 out of 36 months at the company have been work from home. What I was told is that I go idle too often in chat to trust to work from home. Basically, we have a company-wide IM system that shows you as available, idle, or in a meeting. If you don't touch your keyboard for 5 minutes, you show as idle. So they've decided to use this as a measure for who is working and who isn't. The thing is, like many people in many types of jobs, I don't have shit to do for a full 8 hours every single day. The amount of work I have to do on a typical day takes 3 to 5 hours of actual attention. There simply isn't something to do all the time. My performance numbers actually went up working from home. By all objective KPI numbers, I'm a better worker at home. In fact, in the KPIs that I don't flat out lead the team in, I come in second. There isn't work to do that I'm neglecting or procrastinating. When something comes up, I simply do it until it's done or until I can't do anymore due to waiting on someone else, then stop. And I've done that method long enough that my work queue stays empty because I work to get my queue down to the point where when something comes up, I can immediately address it and be done with it. But because I have other ways to spend my time in downtime instead of messing around online at my cube pretending to be working, meaning I show idle more often, I'm a worse worker apparently. I was told if it weren't for that, they would let me work at home. So I wrote a 6-line PowerShell script that virtually inputs the period key every 4 minutes that starts running every day at 8 a.m. and stops at 5 p.m. So now I literally never go idle. I do the same amount of work and still read books, watch TV, and play video games on the side. But I have a shiny green check next to my name all day. Because of COVID complications, they eventually said no going back until after Labor Day. I just had a meeting with my boss, and he said over this time they've noticed I go idle a lot less than I used to, so they're changing my designation to work from home, all because of a little icon in some software. This concludes my TED Talk on why low to middle level managers are the dumbest, most useless do-nothing positions in all of corporate America. Take off my earphones while you're speaking to me? Sure, no problem, officer. Happened this morning. Even though I made a complete and full stop at a 4-way stop, I get pulled over by a police vehicle, lights flashing, the works. I turn my dash cam around to face me and whomever goes in front of the driver's side window. I roll it down and ask, "What seems to be the problem, officer?" Officer looks at me the way one would look at a sticky piece of gum stuck to the bottom of one's shoe. "You didn't make a complete stop," he says. I adjust one of my hearing aids, lost part of my hearing due to being a touring session musician previously, and before I could speak, he firmly orders, "Sir, take off your headphones when I'm talking to you." I take both hearing aids off and look at him. I can read lips a little bit, but we are both masked, so I can't understand what he's saying. I communicate in sign language simultaneously while speaking verbally. I'm deaf and didn't understand what you just said. Can you communicate to me in ASL, American Sign Language, please? He points at my hearing aids that look like Apple AirPods. AirPods, motioning me to put them on. I respond, "Yes, officer. Without those, I can only communicate in ASL. Please instruct me in ASL and I will be compliant in every possible way." He looks at the dash cam that's neatly pointed squarely at us and mumbles, "For sake." He then motions for me to go, giving me 2 thumbs up. Needless to say, I rolled up the window and drove away as fast as legally allowed. Couldn't wipe the smile off my face all day, lol.